Commander Zekthar of the Vortak Empire stood before the holographic display showing the small blue-green planet designated as System 2847C. His 6 eyes studied the readings with growing interest. The planet showed signs of primitive civilization, electromagnetic signatures, crude orbital debris, and what appeared to be basic spacefaring capabilities. "Another backwater species," muttered his tactical officer, Morgeth. "Their technology appears to be at least 3,000 cycles behind ours. They barely understand fusion power." Zekthar's mandibles clicked in agreement. The Vortak had encountered dozens of such species during their expansion across this arm of the galaxy. Most submitted immediately upon seeing the overwhelming superiority of Vortak technology. Those who didn't were quickly educated through a demonstration of force. "Sir, we're receiving primitive radio transmissions from the planet," reported Communications Officer Velnara. "They appear to call themselves humans and their world Earth." The bridge of the massive dreadnought Void Render hummed with activity as the crew prepared for standard first contact protocols. At 3 kilometers long and bristling with plasma cannons, particle beam arrays, and gravitational disruptors, the Void Render was one of the Empire's most feared vessels. It had subjugated over 40 worlds in the past decade alone. "Begin standard intimidation approach," ordered Zekthar. "Decloak at the edge of their system. Let them see what they're dealing with." As the massive ship shimmered into visibility near the orbit of the human's outermost gas giant, alarms immediately began blaring across Earth's primitive detection networks. The humans' response was swift but chaotic. Their small fleet of chemical propulsion vessels scrambled from various orbital stations, numbering perhaps 24 craft total. "Pathetic," snorted Morgeth, watching the human ships approach in loose formation. "Those toy rockets couldn't penetrate our shields if we powered them down to minimum." Zekthar studied the approaching human vessels with professional interest. They were crude indeed, metal tubes propelled by controlled explosions, armed with what appeared to be kinetic projectiles and primitive nuclear warheads. Still, he had to admire their courage. Many species fled at first sight of a Vortak dreadnought. "Open a channel," he commanded. "Let's see if they're reasonable." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of what appeared to be the human's flagship. A bipedal creature with pale skin and strange facial hair stood at attention. The being wore a dark uniform decorated with various symbols and insignia. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force," the human announced in their primitive language, which the universal translators quickly decoded. "You are in violation of Earth's sovereign space. State your intentions immediately." Several Vortak officers chittered with amusement at the tiny creature's boldness. Zekthar raised a clawed hand for silence. "I am Commander Zekthar of the Vortak Empire," he replied, his translation coming through in the human's language. "Your world now falls under Imperial jurisdiction. You will surrender unconditionally and prepare for integration into our empire. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force." Admiral Chen's expression hardened. "I don't think you understand our position, alien. This is our home. We will defend it." "You have 1 standard time unit to comply," Zekthar continued, ignoring the human's defiance. "Power down your primitive weapons and prepare to receive Imperial administrators. Any aggressive action will result in the complete destruction of your fleet and orbital installations." The transmission ended as Admiral Chen cut the connection. On the tactical display, the human ships continued their approach, maintaining formation despite being hopelessly outmatched. "Sir, they're not backing down," reported Velnara with surprise. "If anything, they're accelerating toward us." Zekthar felt a flicker of irritation. Usually, a demonstration of superior firepower was enough to convince primitives to surrender. Perhaps these humans needed a more direct lesson. "Target their lead vessel," he ordered. "Single plasma bolt, low power. Disable but don't destroy." They need to understand the futility of resistance. The Void Render's forward plasma cannon charged with a deep thrumming sound. A brilliant lance of superheated energy lanced out across space, striking the human flagship's starboard section. The primitive vessel shuddered under the impact, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches. But, instead of surrendering, the damaged ship continued forward, even as its companion vessels moved to provide cover and assistance. "Fascinating," murmured Science Officer Telvac from her station. "They're exhibiting highly unusual behavior patterns for a primitive species. Most civilizations recognize superior force and submit rationally. Perhaps they require a more substantial demonstration, suggested Morgoth. We could vaporize one of their smaller vessels completely. But, before Zekthar could respond, the human fleet did something unexpected. Instead of maintaining their previous formation, they suddenly scattered in all directions, moving with surprising coordination and speed. "Sir, they're deploying some kind of debris field," reported the tactical officer with confusion. "Multiple small objects launching from their vessels." The view screen showed hundreds of tiny metallic objects spreading out from the human ships, creating a vast cloud of what appeared to be scrap metal and industrial components. "Are they trying to create a barrier?" wondered Telvac. "The objects are too small to pose any threat to our shields." That's when the first explosion occurred. A brilliant flash erupted near the Void Render's port side as one of the scattered objects detonated with far more force than should have been possible for its size. The ship's shields absorbed the blast easily, but the explosion was followed by another, then another. "Nuclear devices," reported Telvac with growing alarm. "But the energy output is beyond what their technology should be capable of. They've somehow managed to create enhanced fusion warheads." The debris field around the Vorthack ship became a constellation of nuclear fire as hundreds of concealed warheads detonated in sequence. Each explosion was individually harmless to the dreadnought's shields, but the cumulative effect was starting to strain the protective barriers. "Impossible," breathed Morgoth. "They're using their own ships as delivery systems for a distributed nuclear minefield. The tactical coordination required for such a maneuver." On the screen, Admiral Chen's battered flagship reappeared on communications. The human leader's uniform was torn and bloodied, but her expression remained defiant. "You wanted to see our weapons," she said calmly. "That was just our opening move." Suddenly, the Void Render sensors detected massive electromagnetic signatures from the planet below. Across Earth's surface, gigantic installations were powering up structures that had somehow escaped initial scanning. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy buildups from the planetary surface," reported Telvac urgently. "Multiple installations across their northern continent are charging what appears to be some kind of particle acceleration system." "Ground-based weapons?" Zekthar's mandibles clicked nervously. "At their technological level, they shouldn't be capable of effective orbital bombardment." The answer came in the form of a lance of accelerated particles that streaked up from Earth's surface with impossible precision. The beam struck the Void Render with such force that the entire ship groaned under the impact. Shield generators across 3 decks overloaded simultaneously. "Shields down to 60%, shouted the engineering officer. That was a relativistic particle beam. How did they achieve such focusing at this range? Before anyone could answer, 17 more beams lanced up from the planet's surface, each one targeted at a different section of the dreadnought. The Void Render shook violently as its shields failed under the coordinated assault. "All shields down," engineering reported in panic. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Zekthar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than 10 minutes, a primitive species had managed to cripple one of the Empire's most powerful warships. It should have been impossible. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the human flagship," reported Velnara. Admiral Chen appeared on screen again, and this time she was smiling. "Commander Zekthar, you seem to be having technical difficulties. Perhaps now would be a good time to discuss our terms for your surrender." "Surrender?" Zekthar's voice rose to a screech. "We are the Vorthack Empire. We do not surrender to primitives." "Then, you'll die like primitives," Chen replied coolly. "You see, Commander, you made a crucial error in your assessment of humanity. You assumed that because we haven't achieved your level of technology, we're helpless. But what you failed to consider is that we've had to be creative with what we have. Those primitive nuclear devices you dismissed? We've had them for over a century. We've had plenty of time to think about how to use them effectively." On the tactical display, more human vessels were emerging from concealment throughout the solar system, ships that had been powered down and drifting like asteroids, undetectable until they activated their systems. "The particle beams from our surface installations?" Chen continued. "We've been building those in secret for decades, ever since our first radio telescopes detected artificial signals from deep space. We knew someone would come eventually. We wanted to be ready." Telvac's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, I'm detecting over 200 additional human vessels throughout their system. They were using passive stealth technology, essentially hiding by appearing to be space debris. 200 ships? Morgetha's voice cracked. Our intelligence reports indicated perhaps 36 primitive vessels total. Your intelligence was meant to see exactly what we wanted it to see, Admiral Chen said with satisfaction. Welcome to humanity's first lesson in asymmetric warfare, Commander. We've been practicing it against each other for thousands of years. The Void Render lurched again as more particle beams struck from new positions across Earth's surface. The ship's mighty engines were starting to fail, and escape was looking increasingly unlikely. Sir, we need to withdraw immediately, urged Morgeth. We can regroup with the main fleet and return with overwhelming force. But Zekthar's pride would not allow retreat. The Vortak Empire had never been defeated by a primitive species. The very idea was unthinkable. All weapons, full power, he commanded. Target their planetary population centers. If they want to play with superior forces, they'll learn the price of defiance. The Void Render's remaining plasma cannons swiveled toward Earth, charging to full power. But, as the weapons prepared to fire, something extraordinary happened. Every single human ship in the system suddenly changed course, converging on the Vortak dreadnought with suicidal determination. They came from all directions above, below, and, from the sides, accelerating to ramming speed with their primitive but powerful chemical rockets. They're all targeting us simultaneously, reported Telvac in amazement. 200 vessels in perfect coordination. The computational power required for such precise navigation. They're going to ram us, realized Morgeth with horror. All of them at once. Admiral Chen's voice came over the communications one final time. You came here expecting to find helpless primitives, Commander. Instead, you found humans. We don't surrender our home. We don't bow to superior force. And, we never, ever forget who strikes first. The first human ship impacted the Void Render's hull with the force of a meteor strike. Its nuclear power core detonated on contact, tearing a massive hole in the dreadnought's armor. The second ship struck 3 seconds later, then, the third. Within minutes, dozens of human vessels had transformed themselves into guided missiles, each one carrying enough nuclear material to breach the Vortak ship's hull. The Void Render, pride of the Imperial fleet, was being torn apart by an enemy that refused to acknowledge its own inferiority. As emergency klaxons wailed throughout the ship and sections of hull began venting atmosphere, Zekthar finally understood the magnitude of his error. These humans weren't just primitive, they were insane. What rational species would sacrifice hundreds of ships and thousands of lives just to prevent subjugation? Emergency withdrawal, he finally commanded, but it was too late. The Void Render's engines had taken too much damage. The ship was trapped in Earth's gravity well, surrounded by suicidal humans who seemed genuinely willing to die rather than submit. The last thing Commander Zekthar saw before his flagship's reactor core overloaded was Admiral Chen's transmission from her own dying vessel. She was saluting him with what the translators indicated was a gesture of farewell. Give my regards to whatever's left of your empire, Commander, she said calmly. Tell them that Earth is not for conquest. Tell them that humans protect what's ours. And tell them that if they ever come back, we'll be waiting. The Void Render exploded in a brilliant flash that was visible from Earth's surface. But, as the nuclear fire faded, something else became apparent. Hidden throughout the solar system, massive installations were powering up. Shipyards that had been concealed as asteroids. Weapons platforms disguised as communication satellites. Defense networks that spanned from Mercury to Pluto. Humanity had not just defeated one Vortak ship. They had revealed that they were far more prepared for interstellar conflict than anyone had imagined. And, somewhere in the depths of space, automated beacon systems were already broadcasting a message to Earth's allies, species that had been quietly contacted and befriended over the past century through careful radio telescope diplomacy. The message was simple: the test is complete. Humanity has proven itself. Welcome them to the Galactic Defense Consortium. As the wreckage of the Void Render drifted through Earth's system, it carried with it a new understanding. The Vortak Empire had not just attacked a primitive world. They had struck at a species that was already part of something much larger, a secret alliance of civilizations that had been preparing for exactly this moment. And, now, with first blood drawn, that alliance was about to reveal itself to a galaxy that thought it knew how wars were fought. The age of human vengeance was about to begin. 6 months after first contact with the Galactic Defense Consortium, High Admiral Kethmore stood in the docking bay of the massive station known as Harmony Point, the consortium's primary diplomatic facility. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering sections built by dozens of different species, each contributing their unique technological advantages to create something that no single civilization could have achieved alone. Beside him stood a small delegation of Vorthak officials, all trying to maintain their dignity while being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what they were witnessing. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, they could see vessels from across the galaxy, ships so diverse in design that they seemed to represent entirely different approaches to the concept of space travel itself. "Remember," Kethmore murmured to his companions, "we are here to negotiate the survival of our empire. Pride is a luxury we can no longer afford." The delegation included Science Director Telvor, whose analysis of consortium technology had convinced the Vorthak leadership that resistance was impossible, Admiral Jektar, representing military interests, and Chief Diplomat Nulves, who would handle the actual negotiations. Each of them bore the weight of knowing that their decisions here would determine whether the Vorthak Empire continued to exist as anything more than a historical footnote. Their escort arrived in the form of a human lieutenant named Marcus Rivera, accompanied by two beings that perfectly exemplified the consortium's diversity. One was a tall, graceful creature that seemed to be made of living crystal, its form constantly shifting between different geometric patterns. The other appeared to be a floating arrangement of luminous energy contained within a roughly humanoid force field. "Welcome to Harmony Point," Lieutenant Rivera said with a smile that seemed genuinely warm despite the circumstances. "I'm your liaison during these proceedings. This is Harmonic Resonance of the Kethlani Collective, and Thought Current 7 of the Ethereal Collective." The crystalline being's voice sounded like distant music. "Your presence here represents wisdom, High Admiral. Many species choose pride over survival. Those choices rarely end well." "Indeed," added the energy being, its voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We have observed the life cycle of 17 different aggressive empires in this sector alone. All followed similar patterns. All made similar mistakes." As they moved through the station's corridors, the Vorthak delegation couldn't help but marvel at the seamless integration of different environmental systems. Areas filled with water for aquatic species transitioned smoothly into high-gravity sections for heavy world inhabitants, then into regions where energy beings could exist in their natural state. "How long did it take to build something like this?" asked Telvor, his scientific curiosity overcoming diplomatic protocol. "The current iteration has been under construction for about 80 years, Rivera replied. "But it's built on foundations laid 3 centuries ago when the consortium was just 5 founding species. Each new member contributes something to the design, new sections, new technologies, new solutions to problems we didn't even know we had." They passed a vast observation deck where beings from dozens of species worked together on projects that seemed to defy conventional understanding. Humans collaborated with machine intelligences on equations that covered entire walls. Crystalline beings shared harmonic frequencies with musical species whose songs could apparently alter matter at the molecular level. "This is the real strength of the consortium," Lieutenant Rivera explained, noticing their amazement. "Not our fleets or our weapons, but the ability to combine different forms of intelligence to solve problems that no single species could handle alone." The conference chamber they entered was designed to accommodate the consortium's leadership council, a group of representatives from each member species arranged in a circular amphitheater that seemed to extend in directions that hurt to look at directly. "Non-Euclidean geometry," explained Harmonic Resonance, noticing their confusion. "When you have species that exist in different dimensional frameworks, standard architecture becomes somewhat limiting." At the center of the chamber stood Admiral Elena Vasquez, the human they had seen in the original transmission. In person, she seemed smaller than the Vorthak had expected, but there was something in her bearing that suggested compressed energy, like a star on the verge of going supernova. "Hi Admiral Kethmore," she said, stepping forward. "Thank you for accepting our invitation. I know this can't be easy for you." "Thank you for the opportunity to speak," Kethmore replied carefully. "Though I confess I'm not entirely certain what we're here to discuss. Your previous transmission made your position quite clear." "Did it?" Admiral Vasquez tilted her head slightly. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding. We're not here to dictate terms to you, High Admiral. We're here to offer you membership in something remarkable." She gestured to the assembled representatives, and the Vorthak delegation found themselves looking at the most diverse collection of intelligences they had ever encountered. Some were physical beings like themselves, others existed as pure energy or information. Some communicated through sound, others through electromagnetic fields, quantum fluctuations, or methods that seemed to bypass conventional physics entirely. Every species you see here once faced the same choice you're facing now, Vasquez continued. The decision between isolation and integration. Between conquest and cooperation. Between being a predator and being part of something larger than themselves. A new voice spoke from somewhere in the chamber, a melodious sound that seemed to come from a being composed entirely of what looked like flowing liquid metal. I am Memory Keeper Zul of the Adaptive Consciousness. My people conquered 17 systems before we encountered the Consortium. We believed that subjugation was the natural order, that strength existed to dominate weakness. What changed your mind? Asked Admiral Jektar, speaking for the first time. 2 years had passed since the Vortak Empire reluctantly joined the Galactic Defense Consortium. High Admiral Kethmore, now bearing the title of Integration Coordinator for the former Imperial territories, stood on the bridge of the newly redesigned command ship Unity's Edge. The vessel represented everything that had changed about his civilization: Vortak engineering efficiency enhanced by consortium technology, crewed by beings from 17 different species, and armed with weapons designed for protection rather than conquest. Sir, we're receiving priority alerts from Deep Space Monitor Station 7, reported Lieutenant Commander Yilseth, a young Vortak officer who had adapted remarkably well to the consortium's cooperative command structure. They're detecting massive hyperspace distortions in the outer spiral region. Kethmore's mandibles clicked with concern. The outer spiral was consortium territory, but it bordered the region where long-range sensors had detected the presence of the aggressive empire known simply as the Devourers, a species that consumed entire worlds for resources and had been expanding steadily toward consortium space for decades. Magnitude of the distortions, he asked, moving to the central command station where holographic displays showed real-time data from the monitoring network. Beyond anything in our databases, sir, replied the sensor operator, a crystalline being whose form sparkled with agitation. The hyperspace displacement suggests a fleet numbering in the thousands, all entering normal space simultaneously. Before Kethmore could respond, the bridge's communication system activated with the distinctive harmonic that indicated an emergency consortium-wide broadcast. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Elena Vasquez at the consortium's military command center. All consortium forces, this is Admiral Vasquez with Emergency Protocol 7 authorization, she announced, her voice carrying the tension of someone delivering news she had hoped never to share. Long-range monitoring has confirmed our worst fears. The Devourer Empire has launched a full-scale invasion of consortium space. The holographic displays around the bridge immediately updated with tactical information being shared across the consortium's communication network. What they showed made even experienced Vortak military officers pause in shock. The Devourer fleet was massive beyond comprehension, over 3,000 vessels ranging from kilometer-long destroyer analogs to massive worldships the size of small moons. But it wasn't just the size of the fleet that was terrifying. It was what the ships were doing to every system they entered. As you can see from the tactical feeds, Admiral Vasquez continued, the Devourers are not interested in conquest or subjugation. They are literally consuming everything in their path. Planets, moons, asteroids, space stations, everything is being processed into raw materials for their fleet. The bridge crew watched in horrified fascination as the tactical displays showed Devourer vessels deploying massive mechanical tendrils that wrapped around entire worlds. Within hours, thriving planets were reduced to empty space, their matter converted into fuel and construction materials for the invading fleet. Estimated time to consortium core systems is 6 standard months if they maintain current velocity, Vasquez announced. All military forces are to implement Defense Protocol Alpha immediately. Civilian populations in outer systems are to be evacuated to protected zones. This is not a drill. As the transmission ended, Kethmore found himself facing the kind of crisis that the consortium had been preparing for since its inception. But theoretical preparation was very different from actual implementation. Sir, we're receiving direct orders, reported Lieutenant Commander Yilseth. The Unity's Edge is being assigned to Task Force Hammer along with 47 other vessels. Our orders are to delay the Devourer advance while civilian evacuation operations are completed. Delay, Kethmore repeated thoughtfully. Against a fleet of 3,000 vessels, with 48 ships. The irony was not lost on him. 2 years ago, he had commanded a dreadnought that he believed could conquer any force in the galaxy. Now he was being asked to sacrifice his ship and crew to buy time for refugees, and he found the prospect oddly inspiring rather than terrifying. "Sir, incoming transmission from Task Force Hammer Command," announced the communications officer. The main screen showed the bridge of a vessel unlike anything in Kethmore's previous experience. The commanding officer appeared to be human, but the ship itself seemed to be grown rather than built, with organic curves and surfaces that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the Living Thunder," the human officer announced. "I'll be coordinating Task Force Hammer's operations. I know this is your first major consortium military action, Admiral Kethmore, so I want to make our situation clear from the start." "I'm listening, Captain," Kethmore replied. "We're not going to win this engagement," Santos said bluntly. "Our job isn't to defeat the Devourers, it's to make them work for every system they take. By time, gather intelligence, and demonstrate that the consortium doesn't abandon its people without a fight." The tactical display updated to show the composition of Task Force Hammer. Alongside traditional vessels like the redesigned Vorthack ships were creatures that challenged conventional definitions of spacecraft. Crystalline entities that existed partially in normal space and partially in hyperspace. Bioships that were essentially spacefaring organisms. Energy beings that had somehow learned to manipulate matter on a macro scale. "The good news," Captain Santos continued, "is that we're not fighting alone. Task Forces Anvil, Shield, and Spear are already moving to intercept other Devourer advance elements. And the consortium's best strategic minds are working on long-term solutions." "Strategic minds?" asked Kethmore. "Humans, mostly," Santos replied with a grim smile. "Turns out that when you need someone to figure out how to fight a seemingly impossible enemy, you want people who've spent their entire evolutionary history doing exactly that." Over the following weeks, Task Force Hammer engaged in a series of running battles with Devourer advance scouts. Each encounter taught them more about their enemy's capabilities and revealed just how alien the Devourer approach to warfare really was. The Devourers didn't fight like any species the consortium had encountered before. They showed no interest in tactics, strategy, or even self-preservation as individual units. Each ship was essentially a mobile factory, capable of converting matter into more ships, weapons, or whatever resources the collective needed. "They're not really fighting us," observed Lieutenant Rivera during one of the tactical briefings aboard the Unity's Edge. The human officer had been assigned as a liaison to help integrate Vorthack forces into consortium command structures. "They're processing us. Like we're just another resource to be consumed." The insight proved prophetic during their first major engagement with a Devourer fleet element. The alien ships made no attempt at sophisticated maneuvers or coordinated attacks. They simply advanced directly toward consortium forces, absorbing damage until they could deploy their conversion tendrils. All ships, evasive maneuvers, ordered Captain Santos as massive mechanical arms reached out from the Devourer vessels. "Do not allow physical contact. If those tendrils touch our hulls, we'll be converted into part of their fleet." The battle that followed was unlike anything in Kethmore's military experience. Consortium ships danced around their massive opponents, using superior maneuverability and integrated technologies to strike at vulnerable points while avoiding the reaching conversion systems. But, for every Devourer ship they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, built from the processed matter of previous victims. "Sir, we're detecting massive construction activity in the Devourer rear areas," reported the sensor operator. "They're building something enormous, larger than anything we've seen before." The long-range sensors showed a structure taking shape in space, a massive ring-like construction that dwarfed even the largest Devourer world ships. As they watched, smaller vessels began feeding raw materials into the ring structure, which pulsed with energy signatures that made consortium scientists extremely nervous. "Captain Santos, are you seeing this?" Kethmore asked over the tactical network. "Confirmed," Santos replied grimly. "I'm forwarding these readings to Consortium Command immediately. Whatever they're building, it's beyond our current understanding." The answer came 3 days later in another emergency broadcast from Admiral Vasquez. This time, her expression was one of carefully controlled desperation. "Analysis of the Devourer construction project has been completed," she announced to the assembled consortium forces. "They're building what our scientists are calling a reality anchor, a device capable of manipulating fundamental forces across interstellar distances." The implications hit Kethmore like a physical blow. "They're not just consuming matter," he realized aloud. "They're preparing to consume space itself." "Exactly," confirmed Admiral Vasquez. "If that device becomes operational, the Devourers will be able to convert entire star systems without even visiting them. They'll be able to process matter and energy from anywhere in the galaxy. The tactical situation had just escalated from desperate to impossible. The consortium faced an enemy that could not only consume everything in its path but was preparing to do so from a safe distance across interstellar space. However, Admiral Vasquez continued, human strategic analysis has identified a potential vulnerability in the Devourer approach. They're building their reality anchor in normal space, which means it's vulnerable to physical attack during construction. On the tactical displays, a new mission profile appeared: a direct assault on the construction site by specially equipped consortium forces. The odds of success were listed as less than 15%, with expected casualty rates approaching 100% for the attacking force. Task Force Hammer is being redesignated as Task Force Sacrifice, Admiral Vasquez announced with obvious reluctance. Your mission is to destroy the reality anchor before it becomes operational. All other consortium forces will provide support and distraction, but the primary assault will be your responsibility. The silence on the bridge of the Unity's edge was profound. Every officer present understood what they were being asked to do: a suicide mission to save not just the consortium, but potentially all life in the galaxy. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Yilseth said quietly, there's something else. We're receiving volunteer requests from across consortium space. Ships are requesting permission to join Task Force Sacrifice. The tactical displays updated to show dozens, then hundreds of consortium vessels moving toward their position. Ships from every member species, crewed by beings who had made the same calculation that Kethmore's crew had, that some things were worth dying for. It seems, observed Lieutenant Rivera with obvious emotion, that the consortium's greatest strength isn't our technology or our numbers. It's our willingness to sacrifice for each other. Captain Santos appeared on screen one final time before the assault began. Task Force Sacrifice, this is your final briefing. We're going to hit that reality anchor with everything we have. We probably won't survive, but we'll make sure that device never becomes operational. She paused, looking directly at each ship commander through the communication link. For those of you who joined the consortium recently, I want you to understand something. This is what we do. We protect each other. We stand together. And, when necessary, we die together to preserve what we've built. As Task Force Sacrifice prepared for its final mission, Kethmore found himself thinking about the path that had brought him here. 2 years ago, he had commanded a dreadnought in service of an empire built on conquest and domination. Now he was preparing to sacrifice his life for the protection of species he had barely known existed. The difference, he realized, was not just in the mission. It was in the meaning. The Vorthak Empire had fought for territory and resources. The consortium fought for something much more precious: the right of diverse civilizations to exist and flourish together. As the massive Devourer construction came into visual range, Kethmore opened a channel to all ships in the task force. All vessels, this is Integration Coordinator Kethmore. In a few minutes, we will engage an enemy that seeks to consume everything we've worked to build. We may not survive this battle, but our sacrifice will ensure that the consortium endures. For our worlds, for our peoples, and for the future of cooperation over conquest, attack. The final battle was about to begin. Task Force Sacrifice streaked through space toward the massive Devourer construction, their ships glowing with the exotic energies of consortium technologies pushed beyond safe operating parameters. Admiral Kethmore watched the tactical displays as hundreds of vessels from dozens of species coordinated their attack with the precision that only true cooperation could achieve. The reality anchor loomed before them like a metallic nightmare, a ring structure 10,000 kilometers in diameter, crackling with energies that seemed to bend space itself. Around it, thousands of Devourer ships worked frantically to complete the construction while defensive vessels moved to intercept the consortium attack. All ships, implement dispersal pattern Omega, ordered Captain Santos from the Living Thunder. Make them work for every target. The attacking force scattered into dozens of smaller groups, each following different approach vectors calculated to overwhelm the Devourer defensive response. It was a tactic that required perfect coordination and absolute trust between species that had evolved in completely different environments. Sir, the human tactical coordinators are requesting direct neural interface with our navigation systems, reported Lieutenant Commander Yilseth. They believe they can improve our strike accuracy by 18%. Kethmore didn't hesitate. Grant access. If we're going to die here, we're going to make it count. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced. Suddenly, his ship's systems were being guided not just by Vorthak military doctrine, but by human intuition, crystalline mathematical precision, and the fluid strategic thinking of aquatic species. It was as if his vessel had become part of a larger organism, capable of responses no single species could achieve. The first wave of Devourer defenders met them at the outer perimeter of the construction zone. Unlike previous encounters, these ships seemed more sophisticated, still focused on conversion rather than destruction, but with improved targeting systems and coordinated tactics. "They're learning," observed Lieutenant Rivera grimly. "Every engagement with our forces has been teaching them how we fight." "Then, we'll have to teach them something new," replied Kethmore, directing his ship into a maneuver that would have been impossible without the multi-species coordination system. The Unity's edge seemed to flow between the reaching conversion tendrils while its weapons found gaps in the Devourer armor that no single targeting system could have identified. Around them, the battle raged with an intensity that defied description. Crystalline consortium ships phased in and out of normal space, striking from dimensions that Devourer sensors couldn't track. Bioships released clouds of organisms that attacked enemy vessels at the molecular level. Energy beings channeled themselves through consortium weapons systems, turning ordinary plasma bolts into forces that could unravel matter at the quantum level. But, for every advantage the consortium forces gained through cooperation, the Devourers responded with brute force and numerical superiority. Ships lost to the conversion process were immediately turned against their former allies, their crews assimilated into the collective consciousness that drove the enemy fleet. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Crystal Harmony and the Deep Current," reported the communications officer. "They're showing us hostile contacts on our sensors now." The horror of fighting converted Allied vessels was something no amount of training had prepared them for. When the Crystal Harmony, now bearing Devourer modifications that made it barely recognizable, turned its quantum weapons against the consortium formation, several officers had to look away. "Stay focused," Captain Santos broadcast to all remaining ships. Those crews chose to risk this fate to protect their worlds. Don't let their sacrifice be meaningless. The inner defensive perimeter was even more heavily defended, with massive Devourer worldships positioned to create overlapping fields of conversion tendrils. But, here, the consortium's technological integration showed its true power. "All vessels, implement the Vasquez Gambit," ordered Captain Santos, referring to a theoretical tactic developed by human strategists but requiring technologies that only the consortium possessed. Suddenly, every ship in the attacking force seemed to vanish from normal space, disappearing into dimensions that the Devourers couldn't perceive or follow. For precious seconds, the consortium forces existed in a quantum superposition, neither fully in normal space nor completely outside it. When they reappeared, they were already past the defensive perimeter and striking directly at the reality anchor's critical systems. "Target the quantum resonance chambers," transmitted Admiral Vasquez from Consortium Command. "If we can destabilize the dimensional interface, the entire structure will collapse into hyperspace." But reaching the resonance chambers meant flying directly into the heart of the construction, where the reality anchor's operational systems were already beginning to activate. Space itself seemed to writhe around the massive structure as fundamental forces bent to alien will. "Sir, we're detecting massive gravitational fluctuations," reported the science officer. "The reality anchor is beginning its startup sequence. If it reaches full power, it will be able to convert matter throughout this entire star system." Half the ships in Task Force Sacrifice were gone now, either destroyed or converted. But the survivors pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure meant not just their own deaths, but the eventual consumption of everything they had worked to protect. The Unity's edge shuddered as it entered the reality anchor's field of influence. Systems that had worked perfectly moments before began to malfunction as the laws of physics themselves became uncertain. But the ship's hybrid crew adapted with remarkable speed, using intuition and improvisation to compensate for failing instruments. "There," shouted Lieutenant Rivera, pointing at a section of the massive structure where energy patterns seemed less stable. "If we can overload the quantum containment matrix at that point, it should create a cascade failure throughout the entire system. All remaining ships, coordinate on the target Lieutenant Rivera has identified," ordered Captain Santos. "Everything we have, all at once." The final assault was more like a controlled explosion than a conventional attack. Every surviving consortium vessel channeled its remaining power into weapons systems, creating a concentration of firepower that temporarily rivaled the output of a star. The reality anchor's defenses held for exactly 3 seconds. Then, the quantum containment matrix failed, and the massive structure began to tear itself apart as the energies it had been trying to control broke free of all restraints. "All ships, emergency withdrawal." Captain Santos broadcast. Get clear of the collapse zone. But, even as the reality anchor disintegrated in a spectacular cascade of failing force fields and exploding power systems, the Devourer response was swift and merciless. Conversion tendrils lashed out from damaged sections of the structure, seeking any available matter to convert into defensive systems. The living thunder was caught by one of these tendrils and began converting immediately, its organic hull transforming into Devourer technology even as Captain Santos continued transmitting tactical data to the surviving ships. "This is Santos to all consortium forces," she said calmly as her ship disappeared behind a field of mechanical reconstruction. "Mission accomplished. The reality anchor is neutralized. Tell Admiral Vasquez that humanity keeps its promises." The transmission cut off as the living thunder completed its conversion, becoming just another Devourer vessel in the enemy fleet. Of the 800 ships that had comprised Task Force Sacrifice, exactly 37 survived to escape the battle zone. The Unity's Edge was among them, though barely functional and carrying wounded crew members from 5 different species. But they had succeeded. The reality anchor was destroyed, its exotic matter scattered across several light-years of space. The immediate threat of galaxy-wide conversion was over. The aftermath revealed the true scope of what the consortium had achieved. Without the reality anchor, the Devourer fleet was reduced to conventional tactics, still dangerous, but no longer capable of the instantaneous conversion of entire star systems. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the battle zone," Lieutenant Commander Yilseth announced as the Unity's Edge limped toward the nearest consortium medical station. The destruction of the reality anchor seems to have disrupted the Devourer command network. Individual ships are operating independently now, without central coordination. Over the following months, consortium forces systematically eliminated the scattered Devourer vessels. Without their hive-mind coordination and reality-manipulating superweapon, the invaders proved vulnerable to the kind of coordinated tactics that the consortium had perfected over centuries. But the cost had been enormous. Task Force Sacrifice had been effectively annihilated, taking with it some of the consortium's most experienced officers and advanced ships. The loss of Captain Santos and the living thunder was felt throughout the Alliance, as was the sacrifice of thousands of other beings who had chosen to die rather than allow their worlds to be consumed. 6 months later, Admiral Kethmore stood in the memorial hall aboard Harmony Point, reading the names of the dead inscribed on walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. Each name was accompanied by a small holographic image showing the being as they had lived, along with brief descriptions of their contributions to the consortium. "They did more than save our worlds," said Admiral Vasquez, approaching from behind. "They proved something that philosophers and strategists have debated for millennia, that cooperation really can triumph over raw power when the stakes are high enough." "At a terrible cost," Kethmore replied, his mandibles clicking with sorrow. "Yes," Vasquez agreed. "But think about what that cost purchased. Not just survival, but proof that our way of life is worth defending. The species of this galaxy now know that the consortium will fight to the death to protect its members. That knowledge will prevent 100 future wars." They stood together in silence, 2 former enemies now bound by shared sacrifice and common purpose. Around them, beings from dozens of species paid their respects to the fallen, each according to their own traditions but all united in recognition of what had been given up to preserve their way of life. "There's something else," Admiral Vasquez said eventually. "The data we gathered from the Devourer technology is revolutionary. Our scientists believe they've learned how to create stable artificial realities, pocket dimensions where entire civilizations could exist safely, immune to external threats. Sanctuary worlds," Kethmore realized. "For species that face extinction from environmental disasters or aggressive neighbors." Exactly. The Devourers thought they were building a weapon to consume the galaxy. Instead, they accidentally showed us how to create infinite space for growth and development without competition for resources. The implications were staggering. The consortium could now offer genuine safety to any species, no matter how dire their circumstances. They could provide unlimited expansion without conquest, infinite resources without exploitation. "The age of scarcity is ending," Vasquez continued. "Wars fought over territory and resources will become obsolete. The only remaining conflicts will be ideological, between those who believe in cooperation and those who insist on domination." As if summoned by their conversation, new figures approached through the memorial hall. Beings that Kethmore didn't recognize, representatives of species that had been watching the Devourer conflict from a safe distance, waiting to see how it resolved. Admiral Vasquez, Admiral Cathmore, said the lead figure, a tall being with features that seemed to shift between different configurations. I am Boundary Walker between stars of the Neutral Observation Collective. My people have been monitoring this conflict with great interest. Neutral Observation Collective? Vasquez asked. I'm not familiar with your species. We are what you might call galactic anthropologists, the being explained. We observe the rise and fall of civilizations, documenting their choices and their consequences. We have been studying aggressive expansion empires for over 1 million years. The being gestured to the memorial walls around them. In all that time, we have never witnessed anything like what occurred here. A civilization choosing certain death to preserve the freedom of others. An alliance maintaining its principles even when those principles led to catastrophic losses. And? Admiral Vasquez asked carefully. And, we wish to join your consortium, the being said simply. Our observations have convinced us that cooperation truly is superior to competition as a survival strategy. We offer our 1,000,000 years of accumulated knowledge about galactic civilizations in exchange for membership in your alliance. Over the following months, dozens of other species made similar requests. The consortium's victory over the Devourers had demonstrated something that no amount of peaceful diplomacy could have achieved, that cooperative civilizations could not only survive but actually thrive when faced with existential threats. The galaxy was changing, shifting from an environment dominated by competitive expansion towards something unprecedented, a truly cooperative interstellar civilization based on mutual benefit rather than conquest. But, perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. The species that had once been dismissed as primitive barbarians had proven themselves capable of inspiring others to make the ultimate sacrifice for shared ideals. They had transformed from galactic newcomers into the moral and strategic heart of the largest alliance in known history. You know, Admiral Vasquez said to Cathmore as they watched another group of species request consortium membership, when we first met your empire, I thought you were just another aggressive civilization that needed to be contained. I never imagined you would become some of our most valuable allies. The feeling is mutual, Cathmore replied. When we first encountered humans, we saw them as primitive creatures with crude technology. We never dreamed they would teach us the difference between strength and power. They stood together watching new species arrive at Harmony Point, each bringing their own unique capabilities and perspectives to the ever-growing consortium. The age of conquest was ending, replaced by something that previous galactic civilizations had never achieved, a truly unified community of worlds. The humans had kept their promise. They had shown the galaxy that those who strike first against the innocent face not just retaliation, but the united opposition of everyone who values freedom over domination. And, in doing so, they had created something that would endure long after the last aggressive empire had fallen or joined the alliance, proof that in a universe filled with darkness, cooperation could create light bright enough to illuminate entire galaxies.